Hey, how's it going? Hi, I'm Scotty West, and welcome to Absolutely Understand Guitar. Many of you have seen the introductory program that we put out before. This is actually number one in a series of 1 hour videotapes in which we hope to teach you everything about applied theory to the guitar. You're here to learn how to play the guitar. Wonderful choice, great instrument, a very portable little interesting little polyphonic instrument has become very popular in the second part of this century here as we pass into the new millennium, and for very good reasons. It's a really terrific little instrument, and everybody wants to learn to play the guitar these days, but a lot of people just never really get to where they understand what's going on in it, and so that's what we're hoping to do here, get you to really see how this thing works. It's easier than you think. Music is a totally knowable and understandable phenomenon, interestingly enough. It's funny, and a lot of times people don't believe that. We look at our great musical heroes and we think, they're these superhuman creatures that are doing things that we could never do. And the truth is, it isn't like that at all. There's no reason to suspect that you couldn't be as good a player as anyone you ever heard. The one thing is, you got to kind of know what you're doing. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about today, about the basic things about how music works. Interestingly enough, we're not going to do an awful lot with the instrument for the first couple of hours here. And you'll see why in a couple of minutes. Part of that is because, see this thing right here in my hands right here? This thing isn't really the big issue anyway. This is just what I call the dumb machine. It's just a tool. Well, the place that music really comes from is your mind, and a lot of people just don't understand that. So, away we go. We got a lot to cover today. Let's see how we make out. We'll look up here at the board for a second. The very first word I always write down for people around here is this word. It's the word satisfaction. And isn't that a nice word? There's some statistics that you should probably know about. For every 75 people that start off to play a musical instrument at some point during their lives, only one of those people actually survives the initial novelty phase and has it become something that they actually do for the rest of their lives. And particularly as a teacher, I've always been kind of interested in why that is. Why do 74 out of 75 people fail to develop an ongoing relationship with their instrument? Well, some people go, well, maybe they didn't have the talent. And I go, I don't think that's what it is, really. I'm not a horrendous believer in talent. I mean, over the 15 years I've been teaching now, I must admit it comes easier to some people than it does to others. But I've seen dedication and motivation win out over talent 1,000 times. So other people go, well, maybe they failed to develop an ongoing relationship with the instrument because they just didn't work hard enough. Maybe they didn't practice enough or something. And I go, well, that could be part of it too, but I don't really think that's what it is either. I think it goes right to this word right here, right to this word satisfaction. I think the reason that 74 out of 75 people fail to develop a relationship with their instrument is they simply fail to get the payback that they deserve for all the work that they have to put into something. And it's like we don't ever continue doing something if it doesn't bring us any kind of benefit at all. So, how do you satisfy yourself when you're playing a musical instrument? Well, what we're going to do a lot through this program is we're going to be telling you various things, little pitfalls that you can avoid, that you might fall into that would rob you of satisfaction. And we'll look at a bunch of those as we go. One interesting big thing we're going to talk about is when I look around me at the people that I know that are going to play music for the rest of their lives, they all have one thing in common. They must be satisfying themselves. They all have one thing in common, and I guess that means that you're going to have to be able to do that too. And it goes like this. You gotta be able to learn songs just by listening to them. You got to be able to learn songs by listening, particularly when you're playing pop music, popular music. Now, I'm sure you're aware that such things are possible. You may even be able to do a bit of that yourself, and you may have friends who can just listen to this song on the tape or on the disc a couple of times and figure out how to play it. Now, the reason that this is so significant, people go, geez, isn't this like an advanced concept? Why is he talking to me about this right in the beginning? Well, I go, Interestingly enough, if you get to the point where you can't do that, if you don't get to the point where you can do that, you may never really satisfy yourself enough to actually continue playing music. The reason is, particularly if you're into any obscure musicians at all, the chances of you actually walking into the music store and finding the sheet music for the stuff is not very good. You may be aware also that there are a lot of sites on the internet now where you can go, places like Olga and Harmony Hut, where you can go. These are websites where you can go and download sheet music for thousands of songs. But another problem with this is, even if you do manage to get your hands on the sheet music, what you're going to find out is a huge percentage of the time, this stuff is actually inaccurate. In fact, it's so bad sometimes that I don't even have any idea how these people actually even thought that this is how the song went. Fully 70% probably of the stuff that my students have brought me off the internet has been inaccurate. Like I say, sometimes just totally wrong. So, how are you ever going to be a satisfied player if you can't play the music you like? And if the sheet music is inaccurate or unavailable, how are you going to learn to play the songs other than learning to play them by ear, learning to listen to music and figure out how to play it? And a lot of people go, isn't that hard? And I go, well, not really. It really is a lot simpler than people think. The one thing you got to understand, now we all have our friends that can do this now and then and on some songs and stuff, but if you'd ever like to get to the point where you can do this with any song that you might ever want to play, then you got to know what you're doing. Now, it seems funny that I should have to point that out to people. You got to know what you're doing. The funny thing is, a lot of people are going to try to tell you that you can play music without knowing what you're doing. Um, uh, particularly in rock and roll, it's like there's almost this anti-intellectual kind of message, like, oh no, you don't have to know what you're doing. Just come on over to my house on Saturday afternoon, and I'll show you a few chords, and we'll be off and rocking in no time. And that may keep you interested for a while, but I can pretty much guarantee you that it's not really going to keep you playing for the rest of your life. Remember, most people wash out of playing the guitar by like they're 25. This is 74 out of 75. How do I know that? Well, for example, I'm 45 years old. It's 1999. When I was in high school, I graduated from high school in 1972, and it's like that was like the heyday of rock music. All my friends were playing music. They're playing guitar and bass and drums. We were all in the school band together. Now, here it is, 1999. I'm like the only one left. What happened to all those people? Well, that's it again. They just couldn't satisfy themselves. And they were able to figure out some songs for a while, and maybe you can figure out Nirvana, or maybe you can figure out, simple country music or something like that. But how about bands like Steely Dan, or how about Dave Matthews, or how about, how about Fish, more complex types of modern music? If you're ever going to get to the point where you can satisfy yourself by figuring out songs by listening to them, you got to know what you're doing. And it's a hard sell for some people. They don't want to believe that. Now, the only reason that people ever resist learning about music is for a couple of reasons, both of which I'm very sympathetic to. I think the first reason that people resist learning about music is very often music is taught like it's a bunch of rules that you have to follow. And, a lot of times these people are trying to be artists. They want to be free. They want to express themselves. They don't want any rules, thank you very much. And, well, you'll find out that's not the way we teach music around here. We don't teach music like it's a bunch of rules that you have to follow. We're going to teach music like it's a bunch of observations that you're being let in on. The human race has been messing around with sound for tens of thousands of years at this point. We've managed to figure out some pretty cool things along the way, and the smart people wrote that down and started showing it to other people. You can go over in the corner if you want and flop around and try to like reinvent Western music for yourself, but probably all you'll ever do is just waste a lot of time. How do I know that? That's kind of the way it happened with me. As I said in my introductory tape that I've been playing music since I was 6, and I really didn't get it till I was like 25. And that's when I began to figure out that the problem with the way they usually teach music is they give you the information in the wrong order. So you've got all these scattered facts about how music works, but you don't see how one thing connects to the other to the point where you get what I call the big picture. But you won't have that problem here. I can honestly say that in my private practice, if you will, here on Cape Cod, I never have anybody who doesn't get this. It's that simple. And so the first reason that people resist learning about music is it's usually taught like it's a bunch of rules. But we don't teach it that way. The second reason that people resist learning about music at all is they are under the mistaken impression that this stuff is horribly complicated, and they're afraid that even after somebody explains it to them, they're still not going to understand it, and they're just afraid of looking stupid, and they just go, oh, that's okay, no, 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 I'm not even going to try. Now, a lot of times this comes along because maybe you've taken some music theory classes somewhere, and it's like, or you had private lessons when you were a kid with some guy, you know what I mean? And it's like they didn't really connect with you and give you the information that you need, and people often get traumatized about music education. It's almost like the word music theory strikes terror into people's hearts, which is really, in a sense, so sad because music is a pathetically simple subject to understand. If an idiot like me can understand music, then anybody can. It's just, like I said before, it's a matter of getting the information in the right order. You're going to find this stuff absolutely fascinating. You're not going to have any trouble understanding any of it at all because I think what I've nailed, I think what I've figured out is how to explain it to people in the right order. What that means is the stuff that you're learning today is possibly the most important stuff anyone will ever tell you about music. Nothing that anyone tells you beyond this point would ever really make any sense to you if you didn't understand this stuff that we're going to be talking about today. And, for example, right now, I'm saying they teach music, they give you the information in the wrong order. Here is the first thing that they should have told you about music. It's one of the most important things you'll ever learn. It goes like this. Music is a language. Music is a language. Ever heard anything like that before? Actually, there's even this kind of cliche where they say, like, music is the universal language. Well, I don't know about that, but I'll tell you one thing. Music is a language. It functions in our lives very much like a language. Don't you feel like you're being communicated with when you hear great music? Functions in our lives like a language. Interestingly enough, the process of learning about music is very much like the process of learning a language. We're going to come up with countless analogies as we go through this program from the way you use music and your various instruments and the way you use any other language you might speak. English, of course, or Spanish, or whatever. And sometimes this makes people nervous, too, because they go, oh, my God, I hated Spanish class. That stuff was hard, and I didn't enjoy that at all. I go, well, don't worry about that because it isn't like that either. One of the main reasons being that music is, compared to any other language you might speak, it's a pathetically simple language. It much less to know about the musical language, if you ask me anyway, than there is to know about most of the other ones. Now, remember I said that actually we're not going to do very much with the guitar here for the first lesson because, I'm going to myself, well, this really isn't all that big a deal, the instrument, because think about it this way. Here's your really first big analogy. If music is a language, then what is a guitar? Well, if music is a language, then I always say a guitar is something like, or whatever instrument you play, a guitar is something very much like a typewriter. It really isn't the big deal. It's just the dumb machine that you pound the stuff out on so that the audience can partake in the experience. But like any language, most of what goes on in the creation of the language goes on up in your mind here. For example, think of it this way. What if you wanted to be a writer? What if you decided that you wanted to be an artist in the English language? You wanted to be a novelist or a journalist? Well, obviously, you would need some kind of tool to work with. Might be as simple as a pencil or a pen or a marker or something. Might be a typewriter. Might be a big fancy word processor in your computer. Point is, you're going to need some kind of tool. But ask yourself this question: does the typewriter write the book? No, of course not. It's just the dumb machine. What writes the book? You write the book with the command of your language, with the command of the language in your own mind, and then hopefully you understand enough about how the machine actually works, so that when the stuff comes into your head, that you can then turn it into a physical motion on your tool here and get it out so that the broader audience can partake in the experience. Imagine this. Let's say you're trying to figure out how a typewriter works. Now, imagine walking up and looking at a typewriter and trying to figure out what it does if you don't know anything about how the English language works. You'd walk up to this thing and you'd look at the typewriter and you'd go, what the heck are all these funny little symbols on these keys? What do I do with this thing? Whereas, on the other hand, think of it this way. Once you understood how the English language worked, didn't you pretty much figure out for yourself how a typewriter works? I mean, how long did it really take them to basically show you how a typewriter works? Didn't you figure out most of that stuff yourself? You walked up to the typewriter and you went, oh, there's those 26 letters of the alphabet. Oh, I see how this thing works. I bet if I go, that's going to spell cat. And you were right. Well, imagine getting to the same place on the guitar, that whatever musical stuff comes up in your mind, that you're able to figure out how to manipulate the machine there to get it out. It's really easier than you think, interestingly enough, because the really cool thing is the guitar as a machine. Here's my guitar here. The guitar as a machine is really not even a very complicated object at all. But the problem that most people have in playing the guitar is they go right to the instrument first without understanding any of the basic things about how the language works. And for the most part, they just they just don't get it. And you can only go on playing without understanding what you're doing for so long before you start to get bored with yourself. And like I say, most people have given up their instrument by the time they're 25. You know what the other really exciting thing is? Do you know how long it's going to take me to tell you everything you need to know about that physical object, about the guitar there? Once you understood how the English language worked, how long did it basically take them to describe to you how a typewriter works? About an hour, something like that. In our third lesson here, we're going to start talking about the machine, and in about an hour, I'm going to show you everything about how that machine works and more than most people who claim to play the guitar ever know in their entire lives, and you're going to find out it's pathetically simple to understand. How's that? Pretty exciting, huh? There is just, like I said, no reason to suspect that you couldn't be as great as any player you've ever heard. You just got to know what you're doing. Trust me on that. Now, the next thing we're going to write down it's just a funny little detail again. It really goes right to that word satisfaction again. It's just a funny little thing that escapes a lot of people, and it's one of those things that I think has caused people to bore themselves into giving up music a lot of times. You might get a laugh out of this because you might go, oh my God, I'm surrounded by pretend players. Or you might even go, oh my God, I'm a pretend player myself. You see, there's people who really play music, and then there's people who just sort of pretend to play music. And it's not their fault. Most people just pretend to play music because they never had anybody really point out to them what the simple difference is. So that's what we're about to find out. What do you have to do to be a real player? Well, there's two things. So my question goes like this. What two things do you gotta do to be a real player instead of a pretend player, which is what 99.9% of our friends are? They're all pretend players. Well, there's a lot of things you could say, but I'm sure one thing you'll agree on is that if you're going to be a real player, first thing you got to do is you got to be able to get to the end of the song. People go, huh? But do you have any idea how rampant a problem that is in the way most people approach their musical instrument, particularly now in the riff-oriented rock and roll world? Everybody seems to be, for a while anyway, just content to play little bits and pieces of things. Isn't the classic of all times the intro to Stairway to Heaven? I mean, how many times have people walked up to you and said, "Oh, I know how to play Stairway to Heaven," and then all they do is play the first 20 seconds of that little kind of delicate part of the song like that. And my question is, in any kind of real sense at all, what good is that ever going to do you to actually learn little bits and pieces of songs? In the riff-oriented rock and roll world, we have things going on like this. For example, how many times has somebody walked up to you and said, "Oh, I know how to play Come As You Are by Nirvana," and they go like this. And then 20 minutes later, they're still sitting there going like this. And they're going, "See, I know how to play Come As You Are by Nirvana." And I'm going like, well, that's one part of Come As You Are by Nirvana, but what about the part that goes, "Enemy, enemy"? And what about the part that goes, "And I swear I don't have a gun"? And the truth is, if you want to claim that you can actually play this song, you've got to know how many times to do this, "Have a gun," before you go back to this again. And then you got to know how many times to do this before you go back to the verse again. And you know what I mean? And the truth is, if you ever want to be in a band, you've got to start at the beginning of that song, and you got to get all the way to the end. I always say real artists produce real works of art. You don't walk into art galleries and see paintings on the wall that are only half finished. You know what I mean? But it seems to be a lot of people just never get that message, and they just play little riffs and little pieces of things till they're 25 years old going, "Gee, how come this music stuff never turned out to be as much fun as I thought it was? How come I never got in a band?" If you show up for the audition to be in a band, they're not going to care how many riffs you can play. They want to know how many songs you can play. So don't make that mistake. A musician is only as good as their song list. And what you need to be able to do is play that song from the beginning to the end, and then you're a real player. But that's actually only the first thing. Now, another related subject to this is, if you're going to commit to getting to the end of the song, another thing you got to make sure you do is you got to choose doable material. Another rampant problem in the way people pursue music, as you may know, is they insist on playing music that's so far over their heads that they don't have any chance at all of being able to play the whole tune. In a sense, back to Stairway to Heaven again, it's the classic example. That's like a 9-minute long song, you know what I mean? And it's got 4 or 5 different sections, and you'd be nuts to try to play Stairway to Heaven till after you'd played the guitar for at least a year or a year and a half, or maybe with a lot of people it'd be like 2 years. People go, "Really?" And I can't tell you how many times I've had students come in first day in the door, and I go, "So what do you want to play?" And they go, "Stairway to Heaven." And I wind up going to them, like, forget it. You know what I mean? It's like it ain't going to happen for quite a while. I mean, and particularly when we get down here to the 6 main areas of music, you'll see that there's certain criterion that you have to actually satisfy to really claim that you're actually playing the tune. And most people just simply don't get to the level where they have that, what I call, musical maturity till at least after a year or two. Now, the funny thing is, does that mean that Stairway to Heaven is an enormously complex and difficult piece of guitar music? Nope, actually it isn't. On a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of what's possible on this instrument, how difficult a piece of music is Stairway to Heaven? I want to say it's like about a 4. How do you like that? People go, "Really? Jimmy Page? I thought he was the greatest guitar player who ever lived." I go, "Well, he was okay, but ultimately in the end, he was just a rock and roll player." Rock and roll in general is not the most difficult or complex type of music to play. Classical music and jazz is a million times harder to play than that. And people go, well, I thought like Jimi Hendrix and Jimmy Page were like the greatest guitar players in the world. And I go, no, no, in a way, that's just what the record company wants you to believe, so that you'll go out and buy the records. But you probably have 20 people in your town that can play the guitar as well as those people right there. They just, I don't know, they just didn't get famous for whatever reason. They maybe they didn't want to. You know, I'm not sure I want to travel all over the world in airplanes and buses for the rest of my life. Um, anyway, so what you want to do when you're picking material is you want to try to pick stuff that's just not so far over your head that you can't do it. Like, how about Metallica? How about heavy metal? How about Slayer and thrash metal and stuff like that? Might be your favorite style of music, but you're not going to be able to play that without a lot of work. And like I say, you'll see more about this criterion that we're talking about in a couple of minutes here. So get to the end of the song and do that by choosing doable material. That's the first thing you got to do to be a real player. But now we said that there's actually two things you got to do to be a real player. What's the second thing? Well, I'm sure you'll agree. Like anything in life, but particularly in art, the only way you ever make any progress at something is by being capable of analyzing where your deficiencies are. How do you learn but to figure out what you're doing wrong and then start working on fixing it? And so I always say the first thing you got to do to be a real player is get to the end of the song. Second thing is this: once you've gotten there, stop for a moment and ask yourself, gee, how did I do? You want to stop and check yourself out each time. And uh, I don't think any of my friends ever did that. For some reason, I seem to be the only one who ever did that. We'd get to the end of the song back in the garage bands I was in high school and stuff, and everyone would want to go bludgeoning right into the next tune. I was always the one going, no, 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 wait a minute, let's stop for a minute. That section in the middle there, you know, we were really ragged. We better go back over that again. We were falling behind the beat. We wound up playing some wrong notes and some stuff in there. So let's get in there and work on that. And you pretty much have to do that. The only way you can make any progress is by analyzing where your problems are. And, for example, one of the best things you can do for your musical career is try to figure out some way to record yourself whenever you sit down to play, whenever you sit down to practice. It doesn't have to be a great quality thing. It could be just some cheesy tape recorder from or something like that. You don't have to keep the tapes. You can just keep recycling them. But whenever you sit down to play your guitar, plug the tape recorder in, start it rolling, and just play. When you're done playing and you're putting the guitar away, or maybe you're in the kitchen washing the dishes or something like that, roll that tape back and play it and listen to it. Listen to it like it's somebody else. Listen to it like it wasn't you playing. We can be awfully critical of other people, can't we? But to be an artist, you have to learn to be that critical of yourself. You need to get outside of your own ego and be able to listen to your playing. It's a real eye-opening experience for some people. For the first time, because sometimes when you're playing the instrument, you're thinking about your fingers and stuff like that. You're not really 100% cognizant of the actual sound that you're putting out. Isn't that strange to suggest? But it's absolutely true. And the tape provides you with a way of now all you get to listen to is what you actually really played and what you sounded like. I've had some students, they come in and I tell them that and they turn white as a ghost and they go, I don't want to do that. And I kind of see why that is. It's secretly they know they're not really doing too well, but they just haven't wanted to face it before then. But I mean, you got to be realistic about what you're doing. You got to face the music, as they say, and that's just kind of the way it goes. So, second thing you got to do to be a real player is you got to check yourself out. First thing is you got to get to the end of the song, but the second thing is you got to ask yourself, gee, how did I do? Funny thing is, though, doesn't this kind of beg the question, how are you supposed to ask yourself how you did if you don't know what you're doing in the first place? Interesting, huh? Well, turns out that, people go, oh, yeah, geez, well, I guess in order to be a musician, I guess in order to be a guitarist, I would have to know something about what I'm supposed to be doing. What are the basic parameters? What are the basic guidelines that I'm supposed to be doing as a guitar player? You have to understand the criterion of the language before you'll be able to figure out how good a job you're doing of actually controlling it. Well, understanding the language of music, the good news is very, very simple. In fact, I'm fond of saying there's only 6 things going on in music. And if you understand these 6 different concepts, then at the end of each song you play, you can actually rattle off a checklist to yourself. You can go, gee, did I do that? 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 And if you can answer yes to all 6 of those questions, they're going to be clapping and throwing money at you in no time. Funny thing is, if even one of those gets away from you, they're probably going to kick you out of the band and get somebody who can. I don't mean that to sound scary. I mean, you just got to face it. You might think you're playing music now, but you may not be. You won't be unless you're satisfying these 6 things. And this leads right into our next big concept, which I call the 6 main areas of music. Another way of looking at it is music is a language, and it has 6 parts of speech. And you have to understand these 6 different concepts in order to be able to really control the medium. Now, I used to ask people what they thought the big concepts in music were, the nuts and bolts things that you have to know to play music. But I actually gave that up quite a while ago because I'll tell you, in the 1,000 students I've had at this point, I never had one person who was able to actually walk in and rattle off all these 6 concepts. Isn't that weird? It's kind of scary. I've had a couple of people that were close, and so I'm not going to ask you what you think the 6 main areas of music are, but I'll give them back to you in a sense almost in order of like popularity, what people used to say to me the most often. You can just judge for yourself whether these would have been the same things you would have said. We're actually going to start down here with number 2. And for example, when I used to ask people, what do you think the big nuts and bolts concepts are in music, very often the first thing that would come out of people's mouths is they would say something about the beat. Or maybe they would use words like tempo or timing, stuff like that. Kind of a fairly imprecise musical term there, but I knew what they were talking about. Particularly here in the rock and roll world, it seems that everybody understands that music has something to do with the control of time. You know what I mean? All music has a pulse. And this, of course, is just under the general subheading. I mean, these are just subheadings under the term I'm sure you also know, rhythm, R-H-Y-T-H-M. Obviously, one of the big concepts in music is rhythm. So, now, interestingly enough, this column over here on our chart is going to turn out to be the most important column because this is going to turn out to be that checklist that I mentioned. So, obviously, at the end of the song, you've got to stop and ask yourself, gee, did I keep with the beat? Question mark. Did I keep with the beat? If you did, they're going to be clapping and throwing money at you in no time. If you don't, the big hook is going to come and pull you right off the stage. You know, I always say there's no fooling Mother Music. There's people that can do it and there's people that can't. And interestingly enough, there ain't a lot of big gray area in between. You have to satisfy these 6 criterion or you're not going to satisfy yourself or any of your audience at all. Good news is rhythm is not a terribly difficult subject to understand. Again, if it's explained the right way, it's pretty simple to see how it works. And we'll be talking about that in, I think it's like lesson 6 or something like that. We'll be getting into that. But anyway, we'll leave that one for right now and go on to the next one. Number 3 down here, for example, oftentimes when I ask people what the 6 main areas of music are, very often they would look very confused because no one's ever really forced them to think about this before, and they go, sound. Music is about sound. And I go, well, okay, I like that. That certainly is true, but that's terribly, terribly broad, isn't it? We're going to have to get a little bit more specific about that as we go. And interestingly enough, we're going to leave this one for right now, talk about it at the very end. Because another thing you'll notice is I've actually left out number one up here, too. That's because number one is like the largest area of music. This is the one that we have the most to learn about. And you'll find that a lot of people actually have kind of a fundamental confusion about the relationship between number one and number three. And it's a little easier to see that once you understand what number one is. And we'll get there in a couple of minutes. But now, let's go down here to number four, the fourth main area of music. Yes, music is about sound. Music is noise, pure and simple. And as such, music has all the same qualities and parameters that any old sound has, like trucks rolling by, airplanes flying overhead, dogs barking, babies crying, trash cans falling down the stairs. It's all noise, and music is just simply noise too. I think it's just fair to say that when we humans play music, we take noise and we very precisely try to control it. So music is like controlled noise. And if there's one thing you can say about any old noise you ever heard, they all have a particular degree of loudness, volume, amplitude, whatever you want to call it. If you stop and think about it, you'll realize that all real musicians are have programmed some little part of the back of their minds that whenever they're playing, they're listening to how loud they're playing. You have to balance yourself with the other members of the band that you're in, for example. Nothing will get you kicked out of the band faster than playing too loud and drowning everyone else out. But if some of your friends are in like garage bands and stuff, go over there next time and check out. You'll see the kid with the big amplifier is like drowning everyone else. The singer is over there going, and you can't even hear them at all because the guitars are so loud. And that's amateur night city. They're not really going to take you any seriously if you insist on playing that way. You have to balance yourself to the other players in the band. You have to balance yourself to the room you're in. If you're in a smaller room, you simply can't play as loud as you can in a larger room or outdoors, for that matter. And not only that, it isn't just a matter of where your amplifier knob is set. You may find that you're called upon in any given piece of music that you play to play at different volumes right within the same song. Once again, take Stairway to Heaven as an example. Both the intro to that song and the very end of the song are very quiet and delicate, whereas if you remember in the middle of that song, there's deafening drums pounding and electric guitars screaming and everything. And when they played that, they had to remember that when they were coming back to the end again, that they were going to have to quiet everything down. So, now, interestingly enough, the official musical term for loudness in music is a word, again, that you might not have ever heard associated with music before. It's the concept of dynamics. Those of you who've had like band instrument lessons and stuff, you might be a bit familiar with that word. Now, I'm not one of these classical teachers that's a stickler for getting everyone to remember the official proper term for everything, but actually it's really not a bad idea, because if I do my job right, you're going to be doing things like reading Guitar Player magazine, and you're going to find out they use all these official terms in there. So one of these days you'll be reading this article in Guitar Player, and it'll be about somebody like Dave Matthews or something, and the sentence in the article will read, "One of the most amazing things about Dave Matthews is his incredible control of dynamics." And everybody else will be reading that article going, "Dynamics, dynamics, what the heck is this guy talking about?" You'll know, well, they're just saying that Dave is like really in control of how loud he's playing at any particular point. His music has a lot of drama in it because there are parts that are louder and more intense, and there are parts that are more delicate. You can express more moods that way and stuff like that. So, the question that I have everyone ask themselves at the end of the song on the subject of dynamics is, gee, did I play, did I play loud in the loud parts and soft in the soft parts? If you did, they're going to be clapping and throwing money at you in no time. If you don't, they're probably going to kick you out of the band and get somebody who can. It's just that simple. Okay. Now, the other cool thing is, how much do we actually have to learn about loudness to be musicians? I mean, are we going to sit here hour after hour studying about loudness? No, it's just something that you have to be aware of. There's not really a lot of facts to learn about it. You just have to, get that back part of your mind programmed that it's always listening to how loud you're playing. And that's all there is to say about that one. How do you like that? Now, down here to number 5, the 5th main area of music. Much as I try to diminish the importance of what I call the stupid machine over here, obviously you can't take that too far. If you want to be a guitarist, you have to learn how the machine works, and you have to also know how physically to interface with the device. This, of course, is the whole area in music of technique. Oops, see, I'm writing a little too big for this stuff. This is all the stuff about what you do with your fingers. How to hold the instrument, how to get the thing out of it. It's the physical part of playing the instrument. As I mentioned before, a lot of people go to that like too early. They think that what it is to play the guitar is nothing more than to get the book or go to the teacher and have him show you, what you're supposed to do with your fingers. But that would be just like tapping on a typewriter without knowing how to spell or anything at all. But in the end, it is ultimately very important that you know how that machine works. There are, certain prescribed and more logical ways, once you understand how the machine works, to actually manipulate the thing. A lot of this very basic groundwork is people just don't get the message on that subject, and again, just wind up wasting a lot of time. If you understand how the machine actually works, which very few people do, by the way, my current statistic on that is, you may have trouble believing this, but my current concept suggests that out of every 200 people that are walking around claiming to be guitar players, only one of those people actually really understands what they're doing. How do you like that? 1 out of 200. I said that to a friend of mine the other day, and he went like this. Boy, I think that's about right, he said. And I go, yeah, that's what I think, too. Isn't that funny? There's a lot of people around you right now that you might think are actually pretty good players. But I'm even going to wind up, through the course of this program, I'm going to give you some of what I call my play dumb questions. It's like you can go up to these people and play dumb and go, gosh, how come blah, 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 blah. And you'll know the answer, of course, and what you'll find is most of the other people around you don't actually know much about what they're doing at all. And again, that's another reason why they get to be like 25 and it's like it's all over. They're just not playing anymore. They can't satisfy themselves simply because they just don't get it, which is sad because it's so easy to get it. Do you know how long it's going to take me to show you everything about this machine and about how you need to move around on it? It's going to take about an hour, as I said before, because it's just like a typewriter, and it didn't take you that long to actually figure out how it works. And it's very compelling. You'll actually see that there's nothing to understanding the guitar. Okay, the rather funny question that I suggest people ask themselves about in order to find out whether they're doing well with technique or not is, I always see playing a musical instrument as kind of like a partnership. There's you and there's the machine. And we all demand things from the machine, but what a lot of people don't understand is the machine demands things from you, too. And it's like you're looking at the guitar going, well, you better sound good and play all the right notes. And the funny thing is the guitar's looking right back at you going, oh yeah? Well, then you better figure out how I work and you better learn the right way to hold me. And the funny thing is, most of the people you've ever seen in your life hold the guitar completely wrong. How do you like that? You're probably holding the guitar wrong. I'm not going to say there's an absolute right way and wrong way to hold it, but very few people ever go back to their old way once I show them the right way. We'll be into that in lesson number 3. But the rather funny question that I suggest people ask themselves at the end of the song is about this partnership thing. Gee, did I cooperate with the machine? I hate to reduce your nice new guitar you just bought there down to a soulless piece of wood with some wires stuck to it, but the truth of the matter is that's basically all it is. And you're the one that's creating the music by how well you can control the language and how well you physically learn to control the instrument itself. And again, it's much simpler than most people think. You just got to get the information in the right order. Okay, down here, number 6, the last main area of music down here is that nasty subject of notation. This, of course, is the whole subject of learning how to read music, read sheet music, and then ultimately, I suppose, know how to write it too. If you're a songwriter or a composer, you're going to have to know how to write this stuff. Now, I leave it up to each one of my students how seriously they want to get involved in their reading. The truth is, if you ever want to be a number 10 guitar player, you're going to have to learn how to read, and you're going to have to learn how to read well. But but who the actual number 10 guitar players are and the ones that you might be thinking are the number 10 guitar players are probably vastly different. Who have you been told, or who do you believe are the great guitar players of all times? Well, some of the names I get all the time are people like Jimi Hendrix, of course, Eddie Van Halen, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and on and on. You might have your own personal favorites too. The funny thing is, once you really understand the history of the instrument, you find out that all these people are grouped somewhere between like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They really aren't. And so people go, well, then who are the number 10 guitar players? Well, most people have never even heard of them. I didn't bring it today, but I have a little uh, board that I have with pictures on them. There are people like maybe Pat Metheny and Frank Gambale and Larry Coryell and John McLaughlin, Herb Ellis, Barney Kessel, Joe Pass, on and on and on. Mike Stern, John Schofield. And people go, I've never heard of these people. And I go, well, basically they're all jazz players. And people go, oh, well, you're just saying that because you like jazz more than you like rock and roll. And I go, well, no, that actually isn't it. The thing is, what is jazz? Well, if you ask me, jazz can be summed up in one word. Jazz is more. Jazz guys know more chords. Jazz guys know more scales. Jazz guys know more music theory. Jazz guys usually go to school, and a lot of them have degrees in music and stuff like that. They practice more hours a day. They learn how to read because you really can't get to the point where you can control a complex style of music like jazz without knowing how to read. So what I'm saying is if you ever want to be a number 10 player, you are going to have to learn how to read music. But if you're interested in those people that I talked about before, the Jimi Hendrixes and the Stevie Ray Vaughans and the Eric Claptons and stuff like that, I hate to hear myself say this, but over the experience over the years I've been teaching, I have found that if I beat people over the head too much with their reading sometimes, particularly when all they want to play is rock and roll, that I just wind up boring them. Because learning how to read music is a relatively difficult thing to do, and it takes some work. And in fact, a question I get all the time is, why is learning to read music so difficult? Couldn't they make it any easier? And I go, probably not, actually. It's a very sophisticated and subtle little system which has evolved over the centuries and conveys an awful lot of information with relatively little clutter on the page. And I don't know whether, if we had it to do over again, we could ever come up with anything better than that. It's actually pretty good. So people go, well, then why is it so difficult to learn to read music? And it's right back to this thing again. Music is a language, and it's difficult to learn to read any language. You didn't learn to read the English language overnight, did you? How long did it take you to learn to read the English language? Well, you might have started watching Sesame Street when you were in preschool, and then you went to kindergarten, and they started to get you to really nail down the alphabet. And then you're in first grade, and they're showing you how to spell words and start to form your first sentences. And then you're in second grade, and they're sending you home with vocabulary and spelling and grammar, stuff like that. And then you're in third grade, and you're writing book reports, and you're in fourth grade. For most of us, it's like fourth, fifth, sixth grade before we ever get to the point where we could just read anything, that we want. And the sad truth is that's pretty much the way it is with to learn how to read music too. You have to realize it's going to take time. It might be a little boring. The rewards are definitely there if you do it, and we will certainly be talking about notation through this program. But another thing you'll want to know is, we're not going to cram that down your throat if that's if you're not interested in playing the more sophisticated styles of music. Oh, by the way, a thing I meant to mention earlier is another promise I make all my students is I am not going to fill your head with a bunch of dumb junk that you don't need to know anyway. I'm not going to try to turn you into a jazz player. I'm not going to try to turn you into a classical guitar player. This program is simply about the basic stuff you need to understand in order to play popular music. So, you've got to know what you're doing, as we mentioned right up front, but it's not like this is, oh God, this endless stream of useless information. You're going to find that everything in this program is pertinent to exactly what you want to do. So, the sixth main area of music is notation, and the question we might like to ask ourselves at the end of the song is, gee, oops, how is my reading coming? It's not really a song by song question, the way some of the other ones are. But I'm going to have to make those boxes a little bigger, aren't I? How is my reading coming? Not really a song by song question the way the other ones are. But very important. You should learn how to read. Another question people have about reading, too, is they go, well, my last guitar teacher, all he did was he stuck me in an exercise book and made me play Mary Had a Little Lamb and Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Stars until I was so bored and sick of it that, that I just couldn't stand it anymore. And I go, in a way, that's pretty much the way it has to be. Remember, you didn't start off reading Shakespeare. The first stuff you ever read was stuff like "See the Cat Run." You know what I mean? So when they stick you in the exercise book and make you play "Mary Had a Little Lamb," that's because you pretty much have to start there, because playing "Mary Had a Little Lamb" in the musical language is something kind of like equivalent to "See the Cat Run" in the English language. And the only way to get there is get in book one and work your way through book one, and then you're into book two, and it's a little more complicated. Then you're into book three and book four. You'll probably be in book five, book six, book seven of any given, Mel Bay or whatever, Learn to Play the Guitar book series before you can pretty much count on being able to play anything you want. And that may well be 3 years from the day you start. And that's actually, if you get in there and work on it fairly difficult, in a dedicated kind of fashion like that. So, anyway, that's the whole subject of notation. Now, up to the top here. This is the big one. We've been saving this almost for last. This is the big one. This is the one you have the most facts to learn about. Remember the things that we've talked about so far, like rhythm. Yeah, there's some stuff to know about rhythm. Dynamics, we said, gee, loudness, there's not a lot to learn about that. We said you'll learn everything that you need to know about technique in just, an hour or two. I mean, there's advanced stuff that you can learn later on. Notation is an ongoing thing, but as I said, it remains to be seen how seriously you're going to get involved in that. This one up here, number one, this is the big one. This is the one that you have the most facts to learn about. The good news is this is also the most fascinating area of music. This is the one that most people are so confused about that they don't even understand that this is what they're confused about. And I always introduce this one by suggesting that when I used to ask people what the 6 big concepts in music were, very often they would start rattling off a whole bunch of words at me, thinking they're telling me the 6 main areas of music, but are actually rather surprised to find out that all they're doing is rattling off a bunch of subheadings under this area up here. And many of these things are words that you're going to know. Many of these things are the very things that you came here to learn about. You didn't necessarily think we were going to be talking about loudness, did you? But these very often are the very things that people come to learn about. And so they start saying things like, well, okay, yeah, the 6 main areas of music. I'm 5/6 of the way through what music is about at this point, and I haven't even said anything yet about what notes you play, which is a pretty important concept. We all know that when you're playing music, what you do is you play notes on your instrument. I haven't said anything yet about chords or scales. Both of words, those you heard about. I'm sure you came here wanting to learn about chords, and indeed you will. Scales. I haven't said anything yet about melody and harmony. All four of these words I'm sure you've heard of before. Another very important word is the word intervals. Now we're starting to get into some that you may not have heard about so well. Interestingly enough, that's strange because that is the most important word that I've written down so far, because all these other things like chords and scales and melody and harmony, they're actually all made up of intervals. There's a bunch of other words in here. Progressions, for example. Chord progressions. You probably might be aware of that concept. Some other fancy words like modes and arpeggios and things. I could write down a bunch of other words in there, but it's not an endless list by any sense at all. It's a pretty, that's most of it right there. And people go, well, aren't those the 6 main areas of music? And I go, no, actually, they're all subheadings under this huge word over here, which you're also going to know, but you might not have ever seen the relationship this way. They might not have ever quite framed it for you this way. If you ask me, all this stuff is about pitch. Now, you've heard that word before, right? What does the word pitch mean to you? Well, lots of times it's hard to put this stuff in words, isn't it? We've never been really forced to think about this before, and sometimes people are just at a loss for words, but it's funny, I see their hand begin to move, and they start going like... And wouldn't you agree that pitch seems to have something to do with like up and down, like high and low? There's high-pitched stuff, for example, sounds like that. And then there's low-pitched stuff like this, down at the bottom. And then there's like this kind of gradation like that, where we go from low to high. And that's all this pitch stuff, high and low. So pitch is all about high and low. But high and low what? People go, well, high and low sound? And I go, well, maybe, but remember, we actually put that word down here. I'm not sure that the word sound belongs under the category of pitch. I think it might actually belong better down here where it is. So pitch is about high and low, but high and low what? Well, one word that we're definitely going to learn to associate with pitch is the concept of frequency. Next time, in our next lesson, we're going to get a little bit scientific about what pitch is all about, because that's going to start to point us in the direction of how these machines actually work and generate these different pitches. But I think there's a better word that you can learn to associate with pitch. Pitch is all about high and low, but high and low what? Well, actually, I think it's this word right here. It is, after all, about what notes you play. Pitch is about high and low, but high and low what? Well, high and low notes, I think, is the best word. That surprises a lot of people sometimes. And so if then concepts like chords and scales and melody and harmony and intervals and progressions and everything are all subheadings under the subject of pitch, that must mean they have something to do with what notes you play. And my basic way of thinking of them is these are just all different sorts of patterns. These are patterns of notes. A chord is when you take a bunch of notes and you arrange them in a particular pattern and you play them all at the same time. For example, like this. Now, a scale, on the other hand, is like when you take a bunch of individual notes and you arrange them in a different type of pattern, and one of the parameters of that pattern is you play the notes in a sequence instead of simultaneously. And another kind of language analogy to this is then, if music is a language, then these different patterns are in a sense very much like words. And music as a language, excuse me, music as a language has an alphabet, and we'll be talking about that next time too. And all you do, just like when in the English language, when you want to spell a word, you take your 26-unit English alphabet and you select certain units out of it and you arrange them in a pattern. In English, we call that a word. In music, we call them things like chords and scales and melody and harmony and all that sort of thing. So, we've done a lot of talking about pitch. We have a lot more talking to do about pitch. But it all comes down to one simple question that you have to ask yourself at the end of the song. Particularly if you think that the operative word is it's all about what notes you play. Then, of course, at the end of the song, you've got to ask yourself, gee, did I play? Yeah, I keep doing that, turning a P into an R. Did I play the right notes? Question mark. So pitch is all about what notes you play and what patterns you arrange them in. Now, we still quickly have one more area of music to talk about. I introduced that one like this. I'm going to produce two musical things right now. See if you can tell me if these two things are the same pitch. Ready? Here we go. Now, I was singing a note and I was playing a note on the piano. Were those two things the same pitch? What do you think? Well, the answer is yes, they were. That means in terms of their highness and lowness, they both occupied the same plane, which was pretty much like a medium-low kind of plane. So those two notes were the same pitch, right? However, in the totality of the experience of listening to those two things, they didn't sound exactly alike, did they? Even with your eyes closed, you'd be able to tell, oh, that's a piano, and that's a human voice. So even though these two things were alike in pitch, they were different in something else. And what might we call that other thing? Well, we could just say that they sounded different. They had a different sound quality. They were both the same highness and lowness. They were both the same pitch, but they just sounded different. They had a different sound quality, shall we say. Even though they were the same pitch, they just sounded different. A piano sounds like a piano. A human voice sounds like a human voice. The best, I think, over-the-counter word for this is the word tone. Although tone is a little bit of a confusing word in the musical language sometimes because tone is sometimes used to talk about pitch. We won't get into that right now. But, for example, you have a tone knob on your electric guitar. Ask yourself this question. When you turn the tone knob on that guitar, or how about the tone knob on your stereo at home or in your car? When you turn the tone knob, are you changing the highness and lowness of the pitches that the musicians are playing? And the answer is no, you're not. You're just changing something about how their sound quality actually is. So concepts like EQ, equalization, tone controls on your instrument. The word instruments belongs in here. What, after all, is the difference between a saxophone and a trumpet? Do saxophones and trumpets play different notes? No. In fact, you might as well sort of look at it like all the instruments, at least in the Western world, all basically play the same notes. They're all typewriters, and they all have the same alphabet on the keyboard. So what is the difference between a saxophone and a trumpet? They just sound different. You can always tell when you're hearing a saxophone. You can always hear when you're hearing a trumpet. What's the difference between an electric guitar and an acoustic guitar? They play the same notes. You play them the same way. They just sound different. You can always tell when you're hearing an electric guitar. You can always tell when you're playing an acoustic guitar. If you're playing an electric guitar, what's very important for a lot of players is the whole concept of effects. You probably know that there are all these electronic effects that you can put on your guitar. Of course, the most audible or visible one, of course, these days is the whole subject of distortion. You probably all know the sound that a guitar makes. You know, right now, I even have a little bit of effects on my guitar right now. A little bit of stereo chorusing and stuff like that. But you're probably all familiar with distortion. That's when you get this sound out of the instrument. That's that overdriven kind of distortion sound that we associate with rock and roll. And the truth of the matter is, not only do you have to worry about what notes you're going to play, you also have to worry about the quality of sound you produce. You have to have a decent instrument. You have to have a decent amplifier. You have to have the right types of effects. If you show up at the heavy metal band rehearsal with your acoustic guitar, you're probably not going to last too long. You need to be able to generate whatever sound that they ask you to play. So, the the official musical term, by the way, is another one of those ones that you might not have heard before. It's the whole concept of timbre, spelled B-R-E, timbre. Have you ever heard that word before? You might have, and just didn't know what it was. Oftentimes you'll hear it pronounced also timbre, T-A-M-B-R-E. When you hear that word, you know that they're actually talking about not the pitch of the highness and lowness of the notes you're playing. It's actually the actual quality of sound you're producing. Should I play this on an electric guitar? Should I play it on an acoustic guitar? You should change your strings on your guitar every month or two because they just get corroded and they just don't sound very good. Many of you who haven't changed your strings in months and months and months have simply forgotten how much better your guitar sounded when you initially put the strings on because they gradually lose their tone over time, and you didn't even necessarily know it. Before you change your strings next time, if your strings have been on for a while, play the guitar for a few minutes before you change them and try to remember what it sounded like, then change your strings, and you'll go, oh my God, what a difference. And because lots of times it happens so slowly we don't notice it. So, our last question that we have to ask ourselves at the end of the song is on timbre here. It's, of course, how did I sound? And that's a totally different question than did I play the right notes? How did I sound? Did I play the right notes? These are two completely different questions, and a lot of times people have just never been able to really make that distinction for themselves. So, there you go, 6 main areas of music. That's all there is to it. For you to be a real musician, for you to be a real player, there's only 2 things you got to do. You got to get to the end of the song, and you got to be able to answer yes to those 6 questions over there. If you do, they'll be clapping and throwing money at you in no time. If you don't, they're going to kick you out of the band and get somebody who can. And it's not a big deal, is it? All you should really try to do is spend a little time trying to remember, trying to memorize these 6 different concepts. If you were one of my students here in person, when you came back next week, one of the first things I would do, and I'm not a real high-pressure guy, but we would just have to go back over it again, I suppose, would be, okay, you tell me, what are the 6 main areas of music? Give me the official musical term. Give me like a one-word kind of descriptive term to make sure that you understand what the concept is. And then possibly most importantly, tell me what that question is that you have to ask yourself at the end of the song. Really, that's all there is to it. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, now we'll just take a minute and set you up for our next lesson. It'll be lesson number 2, and you'll want to look at your in your booklet there, and you'll be looking at sheet number 2 next time. What next time is going to be about is all about pitch. As I say, that's the largest area of music, and a lot of facts to learn about it, but as I said before, the good news is it's absolutely fascinating. And how was that? Pretty good, huh? Wasn't exactly what you were expecting. You thought I was just going to plop that guitar in your lap and start showing you how to move your fingers, but trust me, that would have been just pretty much pointless. And other cool thing is, did you have any trouble understanding anything I said today? I mean, isn't this pretty much like common sense? Really? You know, is there anything terribly difficult here? No. And the good news is, it doesn't get any harder than this. If you understood what I was talking about today, you're going to understand everything that I'm talking about. Some of the stuff, when we get further along, is going to be a little dense and a little more complicated, and you may have to go over it a couple of times, but none of it is really very difficult at all. So, hope you enjoyed that, and we look forward to seeing you next time. And I'm Scotty West, and enjoy yourself, and we'll see you next time on Absolutely Understand Guitar.